Hey, when does the portal close? Is it this Friday?
Yeah, I believe it does close this Friday. It's only a 10-day window to get in the portal. Now, obviously, you have more than 10 days to pick where you're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody goes in with the do not contact tag or has a plan specifically. So I wonder, I wonder how many more people will jump in this week. And obviously we've got some to get to that have, based on other people, like reactionary portal,
which we had today.
Jumps, yeah.
Which we had today. All right, Craig and Oklahoma fans, of course, are excited. David Stone, 5-star player, played last year, entered the portal, remember, at some point last week, and he's now withdrawn his name. He will remain at Oklahoma. That is not only huge for David Stone, but OU couldn't afford to lose their best recruit in quite some time, and so he's going to remain. I'm sure there was discussions. I don't know if there was more business decisions, but Oklahoma keeps their 5-star defensive lineman.
I mean, yeah, that's good. He obviously felt like he had some things he needed to listen to or whatever chatter was going on behind the scenes that led to his entry into the portal. But sometimes they do go out and look at the other grass and see that it's not greener, or they maybe hear some things that they like that get them to change their minds or whatever. But whatever happened with David Stone, he went and played in the portal for a couple of days basically and decided that Norman was still for him. And for that, I'm thankful because, yeah, it would be a bad look to lose a big-time recruit like that so quickly, although not all that out of the likelihood these days that occurs. But still, it would have been a bad look and a bad feeling in your stomach as an Oklahoma fan, and just more of a wondering of if this is the right staff in the right direction. But that does soothe your feelings a little bit to get him back into the fold. So some of those questions disappear, and now you just hope that he can go play and live up to that 5-star, big-time blue chip status and help out this team as they try to get back on track a little bit from what was a disappointing year in their first debut year in the SEC.
One thing he couldn't have done was go to an SEC team. And that knocks out a lot of teams that maybe you think he would want to play for, but he's back at Oklahoma. He remains with the Sooners.
Look, based on his position, he could have had his pick of every other team that he would want to go to in the country.
Sure.
If they met his financial.
Which 5-star, other than quarterback, is the next position you would rather if you could get 5 stars?
Well, I mean, it's left tackle or defensive tackle right now. I mean, like those guys go really fast because, you heard last week, with Fran Brown saying, I'm not paying $2 million for a wide receiver because offenses in college, for the most part, can get the most out of wide receivers that are not necessarily all Jeremiah Smith, right? But defensive tackles, left tackles are really hard, or tackles, offensive linemen, blindside protectors, pass rushers, those kind of guys. I guess defensive ends in that too. I mean, look at Walter Nolan and Princely Uman-Milan in the same week last year at Ole Miss in the transfer portal, both cashed in huge because of the demand for those positions.
All right, so there you go. That's the David Stone decision. He remains at Oklahoma, and it was in the portal, just dipped his toe and decided he would remain in Norman. Meanwhile, Georgia had themselves a weekend. They landed more than just Elo Modozi from Army. He's a former wide receiver, by the way, who was a fantastic player for Army, the cadets at West Point. He now is headed to Georgia. They had others that also, in fact, 3 players total, including him. We're not going to go through everybody because we're not a newspaper or an online as far as like website, but that's a nice pickup for Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldog defense.
Well, especially since they lost their best 2 pass rushers to the draft. They're both going to be first rounders on Thursday, and Mikael Williams and Jalen Walker. Elo Modozi comes over, and this is the second big player they lost. Of course, the running back that went to Arizona State as well. And this is the time, like, they have to make their decision. If they don't leave after the second year, then you're in the Army now. You can't back out of it. So got to take those opportunities as they come. You're going to get a guy who played with a team that has a lot of discipline and is super athletic because he used to be a wide receiver. So it's interesting to see what will happen at Georgia when they get their hands on this guy.
Maryland defensive lineman Lavon Johnson has signed with Texas. Now, I kind of saw this, and this is it's what college football is. He was at one time somewhere. Then he ends up at Maryland. Then he actually signed with North Carolina, and then later in the day signs with Texas. So UT gets another defensive lineman, and of course they have probably the best group of defensive linemen maybe in the country. That's debatable, but not with many other teams. And so he ends up Maryland, North Carolina in the same day, decides he will end up in Texas. So there was some juggling going on, and he gets his money. Texas gets another defensive lineman.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they have the best defensive lineman this year, but I think they're a team that every single year they're in the mix for having the best defensive line, and they're a school that produces them at a...
Overwhelmed by your inbox? Clean Email is here to help. Organize, clean, and manage your emails with powerful automation tools. Say goodbye to spam and clutter and enjoy a stress-free inbox. Try Clean Email today at cleanemail.com. That's CLEAN email.com.
Rapid clip, and so I don't fault anybody that wants to go play defensive line there, or any position for that matter, but especially up front, because they just seem to churn those dudes out. But they like everybody else, can always use more, and don't know exactly what their situation is, because I'm not into already, having memorized the 2025 depth charts for next season. But Texas is a great spot for a D lineman to flourish, and I think the most interesting part is, the double commitment when you've already chosen a school and somehow miraculously hours later you're going to another school. I mean, that doesn't even happen that rarely with high school recruits, much less guys who are already in college. So I guess his phone was burning up, or his agent's phone, or his DMs, or however you want to categorize that. But clearly there was some talking and negotiating going on that benefits him. So good for Lavon Johnson to have the suitors to eventually land him where he went. And obviously with, I would imagine, a nice little bag of money following along with him as well to make that decision flip from UNC. So tough loss there for Belichick. That remains a really interesting school heading into next year of just what that's going to look like. But with Texas, you know what that looks like right now with Sark. So, I don't blame him one bit, but it's a little funky pulling the double commitment and having that along with your portal entry.
Kyle Visser just said, we had a couple of guys that played in the spring game, and after the game was over, played in the spring game, and after the game was over, entered the portal. It is that way. Nothing surprises me. That doesn't mean you still can't have your opinion on it, whether people agree with you or not, but it does seem to be as wild as ever before. And then because of Nico Iamaleava headed to UCLA, which happened, of course, early in the weekend, Joey Aguilar, who was at Appalachian State, threw for over 6,000 yards and 61 touchdowns. He now enters the portal. Nico at UCLA. Now, is Aguilar going to end up where? Is it going to be Tennessee? Where do you guys think? And, of course, this is part of the revolving door and musical chairs.
Look, unless he doesn't fit the offense there at Tennessee, if I'm Josh Heupel, this is the guy I'm calling. I mean, he's the one with the most experience. He'll help me from having a drop off and have to go with either a redshirt freshman or a true freshman this year. I mean, their kind of options are him, Steve Angeli, or some kind of developmental guy, and then
Angeli from Notre Dame.
Yeah, from Notre Dame. I think this is the best one because he's done the most. And you look for not only potential but performance in the portal. And this is a guy who's performed. I mean, granted, it's a different level. And it is weird to me that he's going to find himself in a situation where, he could go from App State to UCLA and then into the SEC with one of the better teams because of all this.
Craig, your thoughts about Aguilar, and also either a landing spot, or I'm not going to predict that because I don't know enough about that, but he now, because of Nico, is now headed somewhere else, it appears.
Yeah, well, I think the Nico thing's interesting because that wasn't official when we left on Friday, so we haven't even talked about that, although we kind of talked about it, basically being a foregone conclusion. But, yeah, I mean, I think any portal entry right now is a guy who – do you think he's going to play at Tennessee? I mean, I think that's what everybody's thinking with anybody who were to timing-wise jump in like Aguilar is. So, yeah, Tennessee clearly needs a quarterback. I mean, so – The running joke is going to be every time you see a quarterback available, hey, Tennessee could use a guy. And so, yeah, that seems like he could be a fit. Seems like, whoever else is out there could be a fit because at this point they need to add some bodies. But, yeah, they also, would potentially need to add a starting quarterback. So, sure, throw Aguilar's name into the mix as a possibility there. Don't know if there's any other options that make more sense for him, if there's any other connections that maybe we're missing out on. But yeah, Tennessee is the logical spot for anybody who's a quarterback right now to at least see some speculation.
Because
I was going to say, to answer that question, Craig, Pete Nakos is saying that the early schools are obviously Tennessee, Tulane, and Wake Forest.
And so that's not even,
it's
not even really a contest. If you're going biggest, brightest stars and lights and competition, then that's a pretty easy choice there. But yeah, okay, Tulane and Wake Forest, I think Tennessee's a pretty good betting favorite.
All right, so Craig mentioned this. I was out Thursday, Friday, but Nico Iamaleava made the decision. He put his decision up on Instagram that he was, in fact, headed to UCLA. UCLA's coaching staff, I saw where Pete Thamel had the report, too, that they had informed the players on the roster that Nico Iamaleava was going to be on campus and also a part of their roster. One of the notes that he did release when he said that he was leaving, and he said all the right things, but there was one quote that I kind of caught my attention. This decision was incredibly difficult. I can see that. And truthfully, not something I expected to make this soon, because obviously things changed all of a sudden. Maybe he or his staff or his group representatives, father, et cetera, thought he was going to get what he wanted. Tennessee said no. They move on. But I still thought it was interesting. I wasn't something I expected to make this soon. He now will be at UCLA.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have to make that decision. Like, when he says that, not expected to, but he did. And we'll see. I mean, I think the bigger question for Nico Iamaleava going forward is, okay, you made this big decision. You know, we're not privy to what the money is, but, you know, all reports are it's going to be less. And also the talent around you is not as good. The coaching around you is not as experienced. If I'm going to make a decision for me, if I intend on being an NFL quarterback, those are the things I'm asking, especially if I'm getting as much money as Nico Iamaleava. And maybe he's right and maybe I'm wrong, but I think this was a decision that if he was going to make it, he very much should have made it in December.
Eric Sondheimer, who writes for the LA Times, has covered high school sports in LA and the Southern California for nearly 50 years. He'll join us today on the story and what he remembers and watching the career of Nico Iamaleava. He'll join us today a little bit after the 5 o'clock hour.
Yeah, I don't think Joey Aguilar is a big fan of Nico at this point, obviously, as we just connect those two stories. So, yeah, he was there at UCLA. Now it's Nico time there in Westwood, and we'll see if the juice was really worth the squeeze for the Bruins. I mean, they seem to be pretty much the market ever since that story started to develop and things started to become clear on his departure. So, weird spotlight on UCLA that I don't think they're quite used to. Does it pay off for them in the end? I doubt it, because I don't think his odds have increased in any way whatsoever to go and accomplish what he could potentially have accomplished at Tennessee this upcoming year. Now, I know they're not the exact same team that made it to the playoffs a year ago, but I don't think UCLA is equipped to sit there and make a run to the playoffs just because they've added him at this point. I don't think he's got better odds to win the Big Ten than he did to win the SEC, as tough as that league may be. The Big Ten's, right there as well. So I don't know. Well, we know that the money is not apparently as good either. So I don't know if this was all worth it in the end. You downgraded in pretty much every single way you could downgrade, from money to program to, maybe not competition, but to playoff odds to all of that. So, I hope the family's happy. I'm sure they're, counting their cash, and ultimately that's what matters, because that seems like what was really driving this all behind the scenes to begin with, not his NFL odds and things like that, because I don't think his NFL odds improved by going to UCLA either. No. So I don't really know what improved by going to UCLA outside of you miss Southern California and you're back closer to home. And I guess you got to win there because SoCal is lovely. But yeah, I don't think he made out the way that he thought, or the people who were really pulling the strings behind the scenes, however much credit you want to give to him or to Daddy or to his agent or whatever. The talking will eventually be done by his play out on the field. And I am not somebody who typically watches a ton of UCLA football. I mean, if they're good and they're competitive and they're in a big-time game, I'll watch it. But there will be a lot more eyes, I think, on UCLA football to say the least, at least early on, kind of like Colorado. Like, let's see how interesting this is early on. Those first few weeks, I think a lot of people will be watching the Bruins that otherwise wouldn't have been. So we'll see if he can take advantage of that or if this is going to be more of a flame-out story.
And he opens up with Utah. That's his opening game, so that'll be of interest because of the connection Utah being in the Big 12. BYU, there's no question they're on the rise. They've taken advantage of moving into the Big 12. We know their basketball team has done really well, and that is a separate story that's been covered too. But Harrison Taggart, now they've got really good depth at linebacker, but Harrison Taggart has entered the portal after 1 year. They do have others there, and maybe this is because it's a great room, the linebacker position. Also, Keelan Marion, wide receiver. This one here was a surprise to a lot of players, a lot of people at BYU who cover them. I think that he is going to be offered whatever he wants, and I think there's a lot of big boy schools. Not that BYU isn't, but this one here, I think both of them kind of stunned BYU, who's been on a red hot streak because of what's happened with their basketball team and also the football team in pretty good spots.
Yeah, Keelan Marion has a lot of offers already because he's a really good returner as well. I think that's why Texas is in on him. They're looking for a kick returner. Obviously, having lost both of their guys who were kind of that to graduation this last year, so Texas went and got their tight end. Now they're looking for their kick returner. Maybe it is him, but I know that I've already read he's got calls and offers from about 12 places.
Yeah, I mean, who was the first name? Not Keelan Marion.
Taggart.
I mean, he was an Oregon guy to begin with, so this is another transfer for him. But I think it'd be hilarious if Baylor went and signed Keelan Marion and brought him in, or Taggart for that matter.
Traded him for Rob Wright.
Which is all just so stupid at this point. I can't even imagine having spent the time that so many people have spent on that story. I can't even imagine. I had to mute like all of the Baylor BYU discussion on my timeline because it just became too much. But it was funny to see Jake Hatch, who covers BYU, insinuate through a GIF that the reason those guys jumped in the portal was because of money. Well, was that not the entire conversation surrounding Rob Wright? And it's like, no. And I'm not going to get back into it because, like I said, I'm over seeing all of it. But it's just like, oh, yeah, it is money. That's like 99% of portal moves are money, not culture, not this or not that. It's money. So, yeah, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And that comes into play. Now, the other stuff does too, but it was just funny to see that after the conversation of the last 2 weeks being about Rob Wright and money. It's like, why did they enter the portal? Because of money. Yep. So, no, you're right. It's just like, let's just call it what it is. I don't know why certain fan bases, when it's their turn, like shrink at the idea of it being money driven. When
it's not a one-way street.
When it so clearly is. So, yeah, it's not a one-way street. And again, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So I think Keelan Marion, certainly when Texas is calling, among others, he was clearly, his DMs were getting hit up, or his agent's DMs or whoever. No one's ever safe and no one's ever under lock and key. So, yeah, it does sound like they got some attention and they're going to go take advantage of that. And, I don't blame them one bit.
By the way, I talked to Jake Hatch on the way here to the studio, and we kind of went back and forth on that. And I asked Hans Olsen if he could be available.